My name is Juan Francisco, and I'm a psychic medium and tarot card reader. I've always been curious about the supernatural, the paranormal, and psychic abilities, and I'm here to share my stories and interview folks who want to share their own stories with us. Let's get to it. What a scandalous topic to have on the podcast today. Well, before we get into it, if you love Third Eyesight, please leave a review. Give it 5 stars on Spotify, Apple, or Google, and share it with friends and family and folks whom you think would be really interested in these topics, being psychic, seeing the supernatural, experiencing the paranormal. Share it far and wide. So, sex and being psychic. Sex and being spiritual. What made me want to do this episode is because I feel that there is a lot of conversation. It's not often talked about, but it also is within some circles of the psychic and mediumship community about how sex plays a role in our lives, the act of sex. And I guess I'll start this way. I recently heard the opinion that as an empath, and I have my thoughts on what it means to being an empath and whether being an empath is actually a thing. I know some of you might not like to hear that, but I have my ideas about that. I'll share about that a little bit in a little bit. But someone shared with me that as an empath, it's spiritually dangerous, and I'm paraphrasing them, not the exact words, but they express that it's spiritually dangerous to hook up with people, hook up with a new person a lot, or like just hookup culture, one night stands, that it's spiritually not healthy to do that. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because that's what I heard growing up in Catholic school and as a born again Christian as well. And it got me to think, well, does being sexually active outside of a monogamous relationship, outside of a emotional connection with somebody, in those circumstances or outside of those circumstances, does being sexually active take away from someone's spiritual practice? Does it subtract something from their spiritual connection? So growing up, like I just alluded to, I grew up with going to Roman Catholic school and going to a Protestant school, high school after that, or secondary school as some people may call it. And I also grew up in the closet. I was I knew that I liked boys at the age of 4, and I hid it very well from everybody in school, at least. Not in my family, but in school for sure. And there was a phase I went through in which I felt so guilty about being a gay young man and so scared of going to hell. Because if thinking about other men or boys and or engaging in sex with other men or boys, but especially thinking about it, because thinking, the way I had my beliefs was that thinking is just as bad as doing. If you think about it, it's a dirty thought, it's a sin. That's what I was taught. And that I needed to ask for forgiveness from God. And so I went into this deep phase of being a born-again Christian in which I tried to denounce my homosexuality and live as, I may feel this way, but I'm never going to act on it because that's a sin. But also I feel guilty for thinking about having sex with other men. Now I'm in college, and this is what I'm thinking. Early college years. So, stepping now into maybe 4 years in college, 3 years in college, and I read the books Conversations with God. It's a series of books. And in one of the books, it talks about the author asks God, well, what about sex without love? And God says, well, sex without love is fine, but you'll soon grow to be bored of it. It'll get boring for you. And I thought, oh, that's a very interesting take. It's not that sex without love or the emotion of love or connection, it's not that that is bad. It's just there's something better. And I can relate to that. That resonates with me. It's not that this is bad, but that it's just there's something better. You can have cake without frosting, just plain cake, which can be very delicious. But you could also have cake with the frosting, and for me it tastes even better. And I mean, the whole premise of conversations with God is that there's no such thing as good and bad, just what serves you, what doesn't serve you. And that is actually a really great segue. I was going to say gate, gay and great, a gate. It's a really great segue into what the point of this episode is. What serves you and what doesn't. That's what it all boils down to. So I personally believe that there is no one size fits all. I bet there are people out there that say, I mean, I know somebody who I was going to go into the topic of food and relate this to, make an analogy with food, but I actually know somebody who does not, who fasts for almost a whole day before they do, as they're doing readings. And that works for them. I want to eat. I want to eat a good breakfast, a great lunch, and a nice dinner. There have been times where I have eaten within a half hour of a reading. And I know that I shouldn't eat a burger and fries and a can of Coke right before a reading. It's probably not the smartest idea because I'm going to get distracted by how my body feels after eating a very big meal like that. But if I'm eating a regular like chicken and a salad with rice, that's okay. Within a half hour, I should feel fine within that half hour and as I'm doing the reading. But there are people that I know who do not eat anything within hours of a reading or sometimes within a whole day of doing readings back to back. I personally could not do that. My mind may change, but for right now, that doesn't serve me. I also am not booked back to back with readings, but when I have readings, I make sure I have dinner before or right after. I make sure that I feel not hungry. The worst thing I can feel is feel hungry during a reading because then I'm just distracted by how hungry I feel. So if it works for you to not have sex while you're focusing on spiritually growing, and that works for you, that's fine. If having sex contributes to you spiritually growing and you're in a growing phase spiritually and it contributes to it, that's fine too. And I think what I'm processing these days is, well, I grew up with an organized religion, two organized religions, Protestantism and Catholicism, that told me it is bad to think about lust. It is bad to lust after somebody who you're not married to. It is bad to have sex outside of marriage. It's bad to live with somebody that you're not married to. And I just feel like to hear that opinion shared in a different way, but very similarly from somebody who is a spiritual intuitive, an intuitive worker like I am, it's like, well, here we go again. I'm back to that way of I'm back to hearing that way of thinking. Now, everything in moderation, like I said, what serves you and what doesn't serve you. It's good to know that distinction for yourself. If for you having a one-night stand with somebody makes you feel very out of sorts, like you can't control your life or your life feels unmanageable or your sex life feels unmanageable or you feel really guilty afterwards, and maybe take a break from doing one-night stands and let yourself think about it. Sit with it. Why do I feel guilty after having sex with somebody new? And is that guilt getting in the way of me discovering or rediscovering who I really am, my authentic self? That's the thing. Everything you do in life, this is the one absolute that I believe in. One, there is a God, there's a higher power. That's one absolute. The second absolute is everything in life, every choice we make should be leading us on the path to discovering our authentic self, to remembering our authentic self. to coming back to who we really are. And if sexual expression is one way to do that, then by all means. If rock climbing is for you and it gives you energy in life, do it. I, for one, will not be rock climbing anytime soon because I am very afraid of falling on my ass or falling to my death. For someone else, being on that, what do you call it? Not tiptoeing, oh my gosh, balancing rope. I forgot what you call it. Tightrope, being on that tightrope and playing in between life and death by being on a very tall mountain and rock climbing, even with the harness, I don't care. That is just terrifying to me. I will never mess with that. But it gives other people the thrill of life. It gives other people joy to do that. Who am I to tell them, listen, you could die from doing that. Your harness could break, or skydiving. I don't think I ever want to skydive. What if the parachute doesn't open? Well, for them, they will take the risk because they really, really enjoy it. And I know that to compare this to sex may sound silly to you, listener, but sex is another activity that brings people joy. It is a universal activity. The majority of people enjoy sex, whether it's by themselves or with another person or with multiple people, whatever floats their boat. And I think we live in a society where, number one, at least in the United States, the naked body is so vilified. We can't ever have a Michelangelo statue of David on display in public here. It could never happen. Now, it is in a museum. It's in a museum in Florence, sure. But in Italy, I see naked statues out in public. That could never fly here in the United States, ever. It would be very heavily criticized and banned, boycotted. So we have this view of the human body. I'll say Western culture, but I'll speak particularly for United States culture. We have this view of the human body that it is dirty to see the naked human body in public. If it's not in a bathroom, by yourself, or with a partner in bed by yourselves. And so we attribute this dirtiness or this discomfort with the naked human body. And I think by society viewing the body like that, it teaches each of us through conditioning and subliminal messages that we should be sort of ashamed of our naked body. Not sort of, just plain out ashamed. And so sex involves the human body, and therefore we have this tendency also to see sex as dirty or mischievous. Sex can be whatever you make of it. That's the beauty of sex. So I think as a speaking with through my own opinion, as personally as a progressive psychic medium myself, and as a gay progressive psychic medium who has been through feeling guilty for lusting after another man, for having sex with other men, I believe that it is nobody's business how sex affects someone's spiritual well-being. And I think even amongst friends, like if you have a group of friends who are psychic mediums or psychics and one person tells the other, oh, you had a one night stand, that's not good for your spiritual well-being. Like maybe instead of saying that, ask yourself why you believe that. Because maybe sex affects you that way, but maybe it doesn't affect your friend that way. Maybe they have a lot of peace with having one night stands. Maybe they just purely enjoy them. I have an acquaintance who is very unashamed of having one night stands and hooking up with people, and that's just fine. And in a moment, I'm going to share with you what my perspective is, like my own experience with sex and how I view sex personally. But yeah, I have friends who believe it's okay to have one night stands. I have friends who believe it's not. And I think both are valid because both serve each of those individual people. And the friend who enjoys hooking up with people, they have been criticized directly slash indirectly by their social groups. And they're really not about it. They are really not about it. They consider it rude, and they're right when they say, "Listen, I am who I am. You worry about yourself. How dare you criticize me? You worry about yourself, because I'm happy." That's what it boils down to. So for me, I have been a sexually active person. I'm not going to go into any details because I don't want to make this awkward for me and especially for you. But yes, I've been active before. I am active. I'm a person who is dating. I am currently in a relationship, and it is a monogamous relationship, and we explore that part of our relationship in our own way together. But even if I were not in a relationship, I would still be like dating around and meeting new people. And there's nothing wrong with that. There have been times in my life when that part of my life has felt out of control. Like I was using sex or using people that I was meeting, whom I was meeting, to make me feel valid, to make me feel worthy of attention, worthy of attraction. That was taking away from my spiritual growth. It wasn't the act of sex itself. It was the intention I brought to it. So to you, the listener, if this is something you've been wondering, like, is me going on dates and having sex with people that I go on dates with, is me hooking up, is my sexual lifestyle taking away from my spiritual growth? Well, number one, if you ask yourself that, it must be taking away from your spiritual growth in some way for you to ask yourself that. But if when you ask yourself that, a lot of fear comes up, as I've said before, fear for me is the opposite of intuitive insight. When intuitive insight comes to you, it comes without an intense emotion. It just comes as fact. It's that gut feeling comes as fact. So when you ask yourself, is my sex life subtracting from my spiritual growth and well-being? I'll repeat the two things again. Number one, if you're asking yourself that, then there's something you need to address about your sex life and or your spiritual well-being. And number two, when you ask that question, it has a lot of fear loaded within it, a lot of fear tied to it, that could be an indication that you're overthinking it. But that's just my opinion. At the end of the day, you are the best person to know whether something is taking away from your spiritual well-being. And if you are a working psychic, you know what? Forget working psychic. You're just a human being functioning. If sex and love trump everything else in your life, if you are engaging within your sexual, if you are expressing your sexual lifestyle in a way that takes away from important things in your life, that's when you have to think, okay, why is this taking up the majority of my time? Just like with anything else. We can go into the realm of addiction and compulsions, but I am not certified or best equipped to talk about that from a psychological perspective. All I can do is just share from as a psychic intuitive who has struggled with my intention in regards to sex myself. I can talk from that standpoint. So if you're having sex to seek validation, to feel worthy enough, then there is something there to focus on, which is your sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And if your sense of self-worth and self-esteem are feeling weak at the moment, that can contribute to how connected you feel spiritually to yourself. And how you feel connected to yourself, I think, can be reflected in how you connect to other people spiritually, how you channel. Because you need the confidence to know that when you're channeling, that what's coming through is real and true. And you have to have confidence in your abilities. And I believe that low self-esteem does not exist in a vacuum in one area of our life. If we have low self-esteem about something, I personally believe, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I personally believe that it's showing up all across the board, not just one area. So if we feel like we have low self-esteem in regards to sex and our sex lives, I can guarantee that that self-esteem shows up, or that low level self-esteem shows up in other areas of our lives too. So that's where I think our choices when it comes to sex and dating and love, how that's when I think those choices can impact our spiritual well-being and growth, because it impacts our sense of self-worth or sense of self-control. But outside of that, you do you. You do what serves you best. And pay close attention to what doesn't serve you. Even within sex, if there's a way you're having sex that doesn't work for you, and there's another way that would work for you, it's just the same. What serves you, what doesn't serve you. If there are certain foods that you like to eat that are indulgent, that you eat once in a while and your stomach feels fine, great. If there are other indulgent foods that you love that make you feel not great, you know what doesn't serve you. And maybe take a break from those foods or find substitutes. It's how life works. You find what serves you and you put to the side what doesn't serve you. But I think the most important thing is being honest with yourself and being authentic when you enter a room. I'm not saying go around and talk about your sex life with people. What I'm saying is don't apologize for how you run your life when the way you run your life has been beneficial to you and feels healthy to you. Especially if you are learning how to tap into your intuition and tap into your spiritual nature. I don't believe there should be anybody telling you, that you are less spiritual because you have sex and you're not in a relationship, or you have sex and it's with people you don't feel emotionally connected to, only physically attracted to. That having sex just because of someone's looks is a bad thing. I don't think anybody should be telling you that. Or you're less spiritual because you eat cake once a week. You're less spiritual because you're not vegetarian. You're not vegan. And all respect to vegans and vegetarians, I am not vegetarian. I'm not vegan. I do eat meat. There are certain meats I avoid, but I do eat meat. Does that make me less viable of a psychic medium? That I leave that up to you. For me, it doesn't, and that's what works for me. But I know people I have known people who would say that an unhealthy food lifestyle makes you less spiritual. That's quite a blanket statement. A food lifestyle that is unhealthy to you can make you feel less connected spiritually. A sex life that could feel less unhealthy to you could be less healthy for your spiritual well-being. To you, what serves you, what doesn't serve you. Something like food is so personal, right? The things we eat, the things we put into our body. And something like sex is so personal. The things we put into our body. Literally, for many of you, many of us. But jokes aside, it's so personal. It's so personal. Or what if someone says, oh, you got Botox? Oh, you're less spiritual because you're not comfortable with the way you look. You know what? Okay, we can have judgments about someone getting too much plastic surgery. Whatever, have your judgments. We may have our judgments. But who am I? Who are you? Who is anybody to tell somebody they're less spiritual for what they do to themselves? It's none of your business. And maybe it works for them. Maybe surgery, maybe Botox makes them feel good about themselves and therefore makes them feel holistically good about themselves. I think about, for instance, someone who's undergoing a transitioning genders. A transgender person or gender non-binary person, which actually I've recently learned that a gender non-conforming non-binary person is a transgender person. So I'm going to correct that live with you right now. A transgender person who's undergoing a transition, they are altering their body if they are deciding to physically transition. Does that make them less spiritual because they didn't like the body they were born with? No. If anything, most transgender folks who accept themselves in their gender identity, whether they're physically transitioning or they're not physically transitioning, but they're transitioning, most of them feel they are so much the essence of themselves once they transition. They feel so happy. I was watching a video of Elliot Page being interviewed, and Elliot says that he feels so much more himself. He sees on the outside what he always felt on the inside when he was a young person. That's so beautiful. I wish that for everybody. So who am I to tell Elliot Page you are less connected to yourself because you weren't happy with the body you were born with? I don't think that's very fair because I don't know Elliot's experience. I've never been in the shoes of someone like Elliot Page to know that. And with sex goes back to, I know it's going to sound uncomfortable for many of you, but the way we relate to someone else in sex traces back so much to how we related to our parents. Because we were taught by our parents how to be emotionally intimate, how to trust another human being. And there's nothing more vulnerable than that, the relationship between a parent and a child. And then when we're having sex with somebody, it's like we're subconsciously, or in a relationship with somebody, actually, either or, we are using the mechanisms taught to us by our parents in terms of how to emotionally relate to somebody. Our parents are our first glimpse into how the world works, quote unquote. Especially in our most vulnerable moments, how the world works and how the world will respond to us. And whether you're in a relationship or you're just hooking up with people or having consensual, which is important, consensual, casual sex with people, you are operating with a subconscious that has been conditioned by your parents or your guardians or whoever raised you as to how to show up when in a vulnerable state. I know this may sound weird to folks. Relating parents and guardians, those who raised us, to the sex we have may sound very icky and very uncomfortable. In therapy, it's something that I have learned about. And it's true for every single human being. Our childhood really determines how we show up as a romantic and sexual partner. And how we, not our childhood, how we engage with our childhood and our child's self shows up in how we engage as a romantic partner and sexual partner. That is so personal. So who am I to tell somebody that their sexual lifestyle, maybe they like BDSM, and I think for me BDSM it's not for me personally. I find it intimidating, but to somebody else it is the epitome of authentic expression for them. Who am I to tell them they're wrong for that? As much as I may have my judgments about BDSM, I shouldn't care. I really don't need to care. And I know that the person who shared with me their opinion on, hookup sex is having sex with people because of the way they look and hooking up with people is not spiritually healthy. They were telling me that because they were looking out for me and caring for me. And I appreciate that. I'm not judging them for doing that. But I think I've learned, well, maybe I shouldn't bring that up again with them. Because, it's not going to serve them for me to bring up my sex life. It's not going to serve me for me to bring up my sex life with them. And that's okay. We can disagree. But judgment is where it crosses the line a bit. And I think it's important as we are sharing the good news. I hate to sound religious, but sharing the good news of the fact that we are all intuitive, that we can all be mediums, that we're all psychic. As we're doing that, sharing that news with everybody, not to isolate people because they decide that what they do with their body serves them. That's my soapbox moment for today. I'm really curious for your thoughts on this. This may polarize some folks. This may make some folks feel a lot of things, and that's okay. This is very uncomfortable for me to talk about, but I think it's very important, because if I felt a certain way when a fellow psychic intuitive shared their opinion with me about this, I can only imagine there are many of us who wonder, what does healthy spirituality look like within the context of sex? Or what does healthy sex look like within the context of spirituality? And what if you're a working psychic? And I'll say it again for the last time. Think on what serves you and what doesn't serve you, and act accordingly. Thank you for listening. And as always, I will see you on the next episode. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. If you have a question or topic you want me to cover on Third Eyesight, head to my website, juanfranciscospirit.com/contact, and send a message my way. If you really enjoyed this episode, leave a review wherever you listen. I'd really appreciate it.